Namaste viewers, welcome to Jaipur Dialogue USA and Jaipur Dialogue. Today is the last show of 2022 and we are stepping into 2023 in a very short time. And as the saying goes, things change and they remain the same. Let's talk about what can we expect in 2023 given what has happened in 2022 and the years before. To discuss this matter, I have the greatest of privileges of welcoming two remarkable minds. One is really young, Dr. Ankit Shah. He's a young, bright mind. He has almost a crystal ball in front of him to predict things, and he gives it as a proof. So, proof of the pudding is in the eating. So, his forecasts are notoriously and famous. And then we have Professor Madhav Nalpatji. I suspect those who are watching this show, they know Professor Madhav Nalpat, a wonderful expert and a great mind in the strategic thinking. So today's show, we wanted to not focus on one particular subject, gentlemen. What I wanted to do was a potpourri of thoughts and ideas. 2022 has been a remarkable year in more ways than one. Volatility, excitement, technology-driven news traveling faster than the speed of lightning almost. So the issue is, what do we visualize in things happening around? So let's begin with the topic number one in my mind is how will India shape up in the coming years in 2023, knowing what we know? Now, before we give you a bit of a time to think through, I wanted to make some announcements for the housekeeping purposes. Please like, subscribe, and share our channel and the work we do. And today's show, we want to begin with paying tributes to two departed souls and the two people who are involved with that. Prime Minister Modi lost his mother. So one of you, please shut the phone, silence the phone. So Prime Minister Modi lost his mother, and we pay our deepest respect to the departed soul and the Prime Minister to withstand the memory of 100 years of mother's affection and relationship. And, her mother's words to him were very profound. The second is a soccer legend, Pele. He passed away at the age of 82, a remarkable soccer player. And in my impression of things, I have been seeing Pele play for a very long time. I would put him as the real GOAT of soccer. So to both the departed soul, we come back to life as normal. So Madhavji, I wanted to start with you. How do you see India unfold in 2023, given the fact that 2024 is right around the corner, as the saying goes in politics, and it's a big election coming? How do you see India shaping up? G20 and all that is a procedural presidency, but critical. How will we take this opportunity to shape India's future?
Vibhuti ji, you have given emphasis on the right word, opportunity. And as I'm sure Ankit will agree, the tragedy of India has been for a lot of these 75 years a story of missed opportunities. Whether it's missed opportunities in terms of trying to fight back against partition, fight back against so many other detachments that took place. Don't forget that the government that took office at midnight on 15th August 1947 claimed to be the successor government of the British Empire government in the subcontinent. Well, the British, I think, were aware that India was going to peel away. And frankly, they did not have much confidence that the Congress leadership would basically support them in activities. So, you found different parts of what was once unitedly ruled from Delhi, whether it is Myanmar, whether it is Sri Lanka, other things, all removed. There was a time POK, of course, was lost. The Ranas wanted India to absorb Nepal. We, of course, declined. That's a very long list of missed opportunities. And in business and in geopolitics, an opportunity comes, and unless you take the opportunity by the horns, as it were, and if you miss it, it may never come again for a very long time. Well, we are fortunate as a country. We are fortunate because a second opportunity has presented itself to us in this era. Cold War 1.0, quite frankly, was between the US and the USSR mostly. They were the two superpowers. And so when we're talking of the Cold War, let's talk and concentrate on superpowers. Well, in that particular contest, from around 1970s onwards, China very shrewdly took the side of the United States against its so called brother communist nation, the Soviet Union, and helped the United States significantly to ensure the collapse of the Soviet Union. The United States was very grateful. A lot of investment came, markets were opened up, technology was opened up, and as you very well know, until I would say about 2010, 2011, a lot of technology was denied to India, but was freely flowing to China. Now, the United States, Japan, Taiwan, these are three countries that are now targets of Xi Jinping's China. And these are three countries that most assisted China in its growth. I want to say that it's a clear example of a third party getting the benefit of two parties fighting. Today, we have a new Cold War. Some of us have been talking about this for quite some time. Others have been Cold War 2.0, what I call Cold War 2.0 deniers. And deniers, unfortunately, are very rampant in the Biden administration, which is still comfortable with Cold War 1.0. Hence, the focus on Ukraine, the focus on Europe, and the focus on Russia, when the focus has got to be on Asia and on the Indo-Pacific, and very frankly, on China. But in this, it's a matter of, frankly, months before even Biden gets that memo. In his team, the Pentagon has got the memo. Several of the younger elements in the State Department, although possibly not Blinken, that they have got the memo. And from that point of view, I'd say India is now in a very strong position to do precisely what China did in Cold War 1.0, which is essentially ensure that it becomes the third party that is the biggest gainer in this particular clash. I don't believe anybody will say that it's to the advantage of India that China dominate the Indo-Pacific or the Eurasian landmass. And one of the reasons for that is your country, the United States, there are multiple levers of authority. There was a time in the 1990s when the Clinton administration was objectively very hostile to India. It tried to basically to make us surrender Kashmir. It tried very hard to demolish our missile program, our atomic program, so China has got a nuclear monopoly in Asia. But during even that period, when I used to come to Washington, I used to find voices in the press, voices in the Hill, and even some softly speaking voices in some of the big think tanks that were supporting my view that you have a major problem too, and of course, apart from Wahhabism, that major problem is the rise of China. This was, remember, the 1990s, when the US started collapsed, and the US thought for the next generation or two it was the sole superpower. Now, the reality is, in this situation, in my view, the democracies need to work together in a way that is advantageous to both. Now, in India, in Prime Minister Modi, we have a leader who is basically has been very good at threading the needle and locating the needle in a haystack. In the case of Ukraine, quite frankly, he has done what is in the national interest. He has ensured that we are not barred from access to Russian resources, and Russia may be low in GDP. It's very high in what I call GNR, gross national resources. So we are getting oil at a discount, we are getting gas at a discount, and so many other Russian resources at a discount, besides a burgeoning new market. But the Chinese are the biggest gainers from the Ukraine war. And I want to say, Vibhuti, I mean, I can't call it the sheer idiocy of the situation when the biggest gainer from the Ukraine war, which is Xi Jinping's China, every day you see some Western politician petitioning Xi, please stop this war. Xi Jinping, this is a war that has taken the energy of the United States, the whole of NATO, away from China to Russia. It's taken the focus of the United States and the European Union from Asia to Europe back again, and again from China to Russia. China is the biggest gainer from this war. And Russia, I can tell you, there are only two countries that can stop this war: America, on which Ukraine depends, frankly, and which Europe counts upon for leadership, and which, frankly, is pursuing a policy which I don't believe is in the best interest of American people or the world, and China, because China is keeping the Putin war machine alive. So these are the only two powers who can stop this war. No other two powers can. And the fact is, at least in the case of China, I don't see Xi Jinping in a hurry to stop this war, no matter what he says in public. But the point is, in this situation, we have to be very clear as to who and in what way we will ensure that we gain from Cold War 2.0 in the way that China gained from Cold War 1.0. This is a golden opportunity. Our, pre-Modi leaders lost opportunity after opportunity, and I'm very hopeful that Prime Minister Modi will seize this particular opportunity.
Brilliant opening, sir. Really, really appreciate that, and echoes my thoughts. So I'm delighted to hear you say what you said. Ankit, I will come to you with the piggybacking on the assertions made by Professor Saab. Is India has been a country which has caused missed opportunities galore, and I used to say, and I still say that India is on the cusp of technology boom. If we don't catch that opportunity, we will be left once again. Taking that cue, where do you see India jumping into the settling the dispute? India is being looked up. Prime Minister Modi has been approached by many countries. Even Zelensky was rather, cryptic in his comment that hopefully Prime Minister Modi will support my 10-point agenda to end the war. Your thoughts on it? How will India take advantage of being the third-party advantage which Professor Nalapatha was talking about?
So, Vibhuti and Professor, thank you that we all are here today. And it's just 24 hours left of United Nations Security Council presidency that we have. And after the 24 hours, there's a cooling period, which means that the next candidature that we are going to have on the United Nations Security Council, even as a non-permanent member, will be 2028, right? So that is 6 years from now. That's the size of the cooling period we are staring at. Now, when we talk about opportunities, galore of opportunities lost. One of the reasons being not doing nuclear tests on time, as cited. Sometimes, some leader being quoted that he missed out the opportunity of we getting a permanent seat over there. So while the rest of the world is looking at India to show some kind of leadership in this turbulent times, with responsibility comes authority as well. So if we are denied that authority, what that means is that India will have to take a lead in terms of demanding authority as well. So what is going to happen next year, and I believe this next year is going to be a huge opportunity for India, because that is the point in time when we are seeing a reversal of 50 years. When I say 50 years, I'm talking about 1973 oil for security program signed by United States with Saudi Arabia in a tacit arrangement with the Gulf, that in exchange of security, the entire crude oil of OPEC will be sold in dollars. So there's a 50 years of reversal that's going to happen next year when crude oil will be first ever, be sold in other currencies. So if a country is not, any country who is not able to purchase energy in its own currency is basically indirectly a financial colony of the United States, in the sense that all the monetary and the fiscal policy directives are going to be based on what happens at the Federal Reserve. So we are going to come out of that next year. So 2023 is going to be, everything bubble that bursts year, and that starts with the United States stock markets, bonds, derivatives. This is what we are heading towards next year. So India is in that sweet spot where it can actually bridge the East and the West. If the BRICS plus nations, that is Asia and Gulf, are looking at a currency which is going to be pegged with real production and commodities, and the West, which is facing high inflation and economic crisis next year, 100% that they're going to face banking and currency crisis as well. I think India is the only bridge that I see between the East and the West, frankly speaking. And that is the opportune movement, along with the G20 hosting, that we should be looking at. And at 70 years, India shifted from non-alignment to alignment with United States and Russia. At 75, it is time, when you have the statement from a White House official saying that India is not going to be an ally, it's going to be a separate pole altogether. So I think that's a big statement coming in from there, and taking cues from there, the background that we have made also in terms of technology. 30 plus nations lined up for UPI and RuPay cards. That's the kind of reach that we have made in terms of technology that we are going to provide. I mean, even in terms of vaccines and the CoWIN platforms that we helped nations worldwide with. I think it's time that India gets its due, and next year is going to be the best opportunity to make the most of it with the hosting of G20.
Big opportunity. Professor, I'm coming to you with that statement. And as a risk analyst in the banking world, we always say that yes, the opportunity exists, but what might just hurt it? Or what could happen? That whether it's the bureaucracy, whether it's our own political ability to commit suicide, as I always say that we Hindus have a uncanny ability to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. What's your take on that? What could derail it?
Vibhuti, let's study the history of independent India. And for a long period of time, our foreign policy was predicated in the foundational belief that what our leaders wanted the world to be was what the world actually was. I mean, they saw China as a very benign country, looking to India for leadership, etc., etc. And of course, and from that point of view, let's basically be honest. We made a lot of mistakes in foreign policy because, unfortunately, the world runs on the basis of what the world is. Let's say, Vibhuti, for example, that you were to conduct your risk analysis on the basis of an ideal world, or even worse, the theorems of some mathematician who has no idea of business or no idea of what the business risk involves. You're going to be in trouble. So the point is very simple. Let's understand the real world and frame policy for the real world. In the case of Ukraine, this idea of being a bridge, I would like to use a simile of a brick wall composed of two parts held together, no cement in between, and somebody is there with one leg on one part and one leg in the other. The brick wall starts separating, and as they separate more and more, the leg gets splayed more and more until finally the poor chap either jumps onto one side or the other, or he falls in the middle and he goes into a no man's situation. The fact is, I'd like to say that I think we cannot save the world by ourselves. We cannot save the world as a $3 trillion economy. Maybe as a $30 trillion economy, we can have a better effort. But I'd like to say, I would like to concentrate on what Prime Minister Modi has said, India first. And where India first is concerned, look at policy from the benefit it will give our country. Now, if you read a lot of my writing, it is certainly not friendly to the Sino-Russian alliance. I pointed to the Sino-Wahhabi alliance. I pointed to the Sino-Russian alliance. Two alliances that China has got. The China is a common factor in both alliances. But when the Ukraine war erupted, I was foursquare in agreement with Prime Minister Modi's policy of using this war to ensure that India gets oil, gas, and other resources from Russia at the discounted price that Russia was forced to give. Otherwise, the entire benefit would have gone to China. If we had listened to Joe Biden or to Ursula von der Leyen or to Boris Johnson at that point in time, the entire benefit would have gone to China. And I want to say this one thing, Vibhuti. In your country or in mine, let us be honest. There are agents of other countries functioning. Sometimes they are overt agents, then they know they are agents. Other times they are what is called useful idiots. They don't know that they're the agents of some country, but they're in effect objectively helping that country. Now, for example, in G20, if we have too much faith that the Chinese are serious about a border settlement with us, we are going to be in a situation like in SAR, in SARC, where we were expecting Pakistan to understand the benefits of trade with India in Pakistan. No country in South Asia has a border with any other country except India. No country in South Asia can prosper without good relations with India. We thought this rationality will go into the Pakistan policy mind. The policy mind was controlled by the military. They have their own rationality. They need to have an enemy. And today that military is firmly fixed in the Chinese camp. You have people in the Biden administration who are delusional. You have much fewer people in Delhi also who are delusional and about China, about Pakistan. I would like to say that based on the research that my department has done, I am not delusional. The United States can never accept a strong Russia. Why, Vibhuti? Because a strong Russia can challenge the United States' primacy in Europe. China can never accept a strong India. Why? Because India can challenge Chinese primacy in Asia, in the Indo-Pacific, in the Eurasian landmass. That is the point. And they are extremely upset by the fact that we have taken a stand which is objectively, if we have been, in my case, for example, when I started taking the stand in the first week or second week of March, you check some of my public statements and writings and podcasts, you'll see that. Till around July, my Western friends were, calling me, oh, you've been you're a Russian agent almost. You've been influenced by Russia. What's wrong with you? You hate America. You're an America hater. After July, they've been changing their tune. And I can assure you, from around August, more and more people are saying, for God's sake, you were right. I think we have jumped into a mess. So I'd like to say, Vibhuti, thank you for the great idealism that has been shown by many people, the great idealism of Jawaharlal Nehru, the great idealism of our freedom fighters who, unlike Abraham Lincoln, did not want to fight a civil war and shed blood, thereafter caused a partition in which 20 times more blood was shed than if they had ensured that partition would not take place. Well, that is a great idealism. I am not that kind of an idealist. I am a realist, Vibhuti, and I am very realistic about we are still a $3 trillion economy. We have a long, long way to go. And I think the Prime Minister, he's a Gujarati. One thing about Gujaratis, they go by facts on the ground. They don't go by airy-fairy theories. Now, some of us in other parts of the country, I hesitate to name states. I don't want to name a very beautiful state, where, with lots of palm trees and all that. But frankly, the reality is, let's be real. And if we are real, I can tell you, Vibhuti, this belief that one day the Chinese are going to smile upon us and help us is going to destroy us. Already, we have got a nearly $100 billion as a negative balance from China. Now, the Chinese lobby in America, in India, in Europe is fighting hard to ensure that no country sign an FTA with Taiwan. You know why? Because they are terrified that manufacturing will shift from China to other countries with the help of Taiwanese technology. The Chinese have got by on Taiwanese brains, mostly. So some American brains, some Japanese brains, some South Korean brains, but mostly Taiwanese brains. They don't want any country to sign an FTA. And so what is happening? No country is signing an FTA with Taiwan. And frankly, I'd like to tell you, the reality is, unless you signed an FTA, and Ankit will tell you he's an expert in this, in a way that I certainly am not. If you're building a plant for manufacture of semiconductor chips, you need to have free access and entry of personnel and material, all kinds of material. And ultimately, if you find the Deng Xiaoping gave that free access, Hu Jintao and Jiang Zemin gave that free access. Fortunately, and I use the word fortunately, Xi Jinping is trying to block that access. In my opinion, we need that FTA with Taiwan to get TSMC and others to come here. They are interested, I can tell you, because there are two. And you know what the Chinese are saying to the Taiwanese? You know what their channels are saying? Oh, don't come to India. And these are Taiwanese saying it. India is a very weak country. China will one day bomb India, conquer India. So if you come to India, your factory will be bombed. You know, Vibhuti, if I can take just a minute more, that Wistron factory, which in near Bangalore, which had that labor trouble. I investigated that. My team investigated that, and we are pretty good at through emails and whatever. And we found that the top manager, there were at least 5 or 6 communist Chinese citizens there, and they and the union leaders. I mean, union leaders probably didn't know what they were doing. Basically, the situation was created and rioting was created. And in my view, and I wrote this in Sunday Guardian at that time, and I said this on NewsX, that those riots in that factory were bought and paid for, because the Chinese don't want more Wistrons into India. They don't want Foxconn into India. They are now very unhappy about Foxconn looking at Gujarat to come to India. And they're working very hard to ensure that conditions are created in which these very sensitive technology manufacturing plants cannot come to India. And very importantly, trying to sow doubt in the Taiwanese mind about the fact that, India can face the Chinese. I know we can, especially under PM Modi, especially after what we have seen publicly in Kalwan and Yangtze. I have met our soldiers. They are eager to go at the throats of the PLA, I can tell you. They are eager and ready. And ultimately, what counts is the human being. And we have human beings as soldiers who are ready to defend the motherland at the cost of their own lives. And I'm glad Prime Minister Modi has done justice to them by this one rank, one pension thing that he pushed through. But the fact is, Vibhuti, let's not have any illusions about the situation. The Chinese have got us in their target, in that, in their sights. And if those of us who believe we can have a beautiful situation in which we can basically dance between China, Russia, United States, the Pentagon understands the importance of India in the free and open Indo-Pacific. That is why the Pentagon has blocked people like Blinken and Sullivan, who I'm sorry to say are Europeans with American passports. For them, the only thing that matters is Europe. And I must end this by saying that the Ukraine war has hit the goodwill of the Western world significantly in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. You are giving 1,000 times more attention to Ukraine than you are giving to these 3 continents. You are giving Ukraine a flood of equipment, free of cost, and giving Taiwan and India, who are also facing threats from China, a much more important military, nothing that is free. You're charging maximum prices from India, maximum prices from Taiwan. And this is what you're doing. And frankly, I'd like to say that the goodwill of the West is disintegrating as a consequence of the way the blatant favoritism it has seen in Ukraine. So soon after, Biden just abandoned the people of Afghanistan to the very same Taliban that the United States spent more than $1 trillion fighting. I mean, it's horrible what we are seeing today. Peace in Ukraine. If Xi Jinping believes that there should be peace, I don't think he's going to do that. So long as Putin is forced to give him, all kinds of material and raw material, so long as he's got Putin firmly in his hand. Because today, by default, Putin has nobody else except China. And I'm happy to say, India under Prime Minister Modi. We are getting maybe 1/20th the benefit that China is getting. At least we're getting some benefit thanks to the steel spine of the Prime Minister who faced down. If I got so much of terrible flack from my Western colleagues, I can imagine the flack that Prime Minister Modi got. But, he resisted that. But I'd only like to say, Vibhuti, please, let's be real. Let's understand the world we live in. Let's not go back to the 1950s, which ended in 1962, the end of innocence. Let's not go back to that. And I don't believe Prime Minister Modi will ever make that mistake.
Thank you so much. Your focus on the fact that let's not live in an illusionary world and a make-believe world that everything will be nice and hunky-dory tomorrow. It's not. You have to, I'm personally a believer in the concept that you got to know the nature of the beast. The nature of the beast with China and Pakistan is they want India gone. So every dance that they do is to make sure that India gets decimated. And that is something that we can't be ignoring. We can't give a blind eye to that. So Ankit, the Gujarati amongst us, and as Madhavji said, the Gujarati has his head in right place. I put it simply, you know your business. Gujaratis know the business. How do you think, Professor Madhav Nalpat's suggestion, how do you think the enemies within, the Pappu, the Prince of Wayanad, as I call him, are out to derail India? The enemies within, people are not even aware of that. The Bangalore incident that Madhavji mentioned about. How will the enemy within be handled by the people of India? That's important. We are all Hindus, but we get divided into the caste basis. And people take advantage of that. How will we unite to see the bleeding obvious that enemy is out to cut my throat? So, as I always say, if the enemy is the barbarian at the gate wants to cut your throat, at that time offering champagne, gulab jamun and lassi is not going to solve your problem. Your take.
Yeah. So one of the fundamental things that has changed with this government is that, and the steps that we are seeing right now, just a statement coming out from Dharmendra Pradhan ji, talking about corrected history being taught from 26 January. So this was the primary move which we all were waiting. I mean, a big chunk of population was waiting for, because we know the importance of history, how important to know the maps. The leaders should be able to know where the maps lied. I mean, in terms of ancient India. And as Professor Sir rightly pointed out, that in 1947, what we have got was transfer of power. I mean, we actually, rose the Union Jack along with the Indian tricolor. So basically, we said that British rule was a legitimate rule over us. So a lot of historical wrongs need to be now reversed, and of over centuries, not just this century or the previous century that we are talking about. So when we talk about, I mean, these days, I mean, post, this the 1971 war, all the wars that I see, I believe that nations do not break at the borders. They break when the civilizational identity is struck from within, and the nuclear umbrella which the big nations have now gotten over them. It is very obvious that now the wars have translated into a 24/7 hybrid kind of a model. which means that your internal population would be used against the nation, which is where, the erstwhile CDS was talking about the 2.4, 2.5 war, that 0.5 which is within the country, and they're out and tamed and groomed and even funded from outside towards this fake protest and that kind of stuff, all kinds of anti-national and anti-social activities. And we are looking at that clown who's doing a Bharat Jodo Yatra. I mean, he's woken up suddenly, all of a sudden, after this many years, the kind of mockery that is happening with crowds joining him, paid crowds, and what kind of again placing him to be kind of a potential PM candidate for 2024. I mean, how many times you're going to launch and relaunch and relaunch, and 2.0 and 3.0, Rahul Gandhi 5.0 and 6.0. I don't know how many times the media, this entire cabal of people are going to relaunch him. A lot of the internal terms of kind of collaboration is going on, because they see India being headed very strongly by a very strong leader, and that is not something that they're going to digest. Even the recent protests in Kerala against that particular port, which Adani is trying to build over there. Now, Kerala, as we all know, we understand that there's kind of a radicalism kind of a problem, but a lot of those protesters belong to the Christianity faith. So a lot of missionary and those kind of fundings are also involved in this kind of protests which are happening. In the farm protest, we see how foreign nations companies started funding this protest via various routes, because they understand that if the farming land is consolidated with a resumed kind of a refreshed capital infusion, will again be starting to give a massive percentage of the world GDP that we'd always been giving. So farm laws were repealed with the strength of those kind of fake protests. So a lot of these things are going to only increase going forward, and which means that the people of the country needs to be oriented by our leaders about what is going to come. Because the more and more we are going to become strong as a nation with a strong leader that we have, and the kind of a vision that is going to continue over decades now. I mean, this particular kind of a BJP rule is, I don't think 2024 anyone doubts them coming back in the central government. So it's very clear that the last bickering is going to be, a lot of shocks are going to come in these anti-national forces, which are so much active in all the states and making the most of exploiting the divides that are, seeped in and creeped in over the years under the various governments with wrong history and narrative building and whatnot. So a lot of orientation and awareness is required among the Indian population. And I, for one, believe that Hindus, the natives of this country, has a tremendous amount of depth with the kind of, the continuous living civilization that we have had, and the kind of indigenous dharmas which transcend us, each of us, into believing that we are not just male and female, we are actually a soul. And which is why you will never find something like a gun shooting over here in India. I mean, you can find crimes in India, but those crimes are not like, there's no logic about it. Like see, compare it with the gun shooting in the West, somebody killing some unknown for no reason. I mean, the person who's dying has absolutely no reason why he is dying, or any connection with the person who's attacking. So the kind of wisdom and the depth which this population has, I believe we will have to, focus on their orientation further, so that this leadership continues to work on at least till 2030. This entire decade, we need this kind of leadership and vision to take India forward.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I will come to you, Madhavji, with another part of the story is something very important. Ankit mentioned too about dharma and our wisdom. I personally believe that information and knowledge is great if you have it. But if you're not doing anything with it, it's wasted. It's time for us to look up our own texts, and education was another issue Ankit talked about. is the fact that we have Ramayana and Mahabharata stories where Krishna and Ram have gone to war to protect the dharma. And we have become such important people that we don't want to fight. And you alluded to that in the beginning, that if you are not willing to fight, then you die. And 80% of the people are threatened with significant minorities. Kerala strike against the port building. Where is this happening? Why is it the awakening in India amongst Hindus is missing? What must happen? And I will add one for to topic to be taken over, that media narrative is critical. Our narrative is critical. If we don't write our own narrative, others define us. It's time for us to take advantage of the media part and begin to share the wisdom of our own stuff. Because I believe, to tell you just one second in this, is that I believe that if we don't fight our wars, nobody's going to fight our wars. And if we don't stand up for ourselves, people will try to crush us. So, religion thing that came in, which Ankit was talking about, we know that Sanatan is all science and technology. Is the growth in science and technology eliminating the fear and ignorance of the practicing faiths of what we see here? Do they see us as a threat? Or is that the reason why the attack is so much more vicious on us?
Well, Vibhuti and Ankit, I'd like to say that I agree completely with Dr. Mohan Bhagwat when he says that the DNA of every Indian is common, and that DNA is a fusion of different periods of history. I have arguments with those who believe that only the last 300 years of history is relevant, or the last 800 or 900 years of history is relevant. I think the entire 5,000 or 6,000 years of history is relevant. Just as I have an argument with those who say, no, the last 900 years is not relevant, or the last 200 or 300 years is not relevant. No, every bit is relevant, and every bit contributes to our DNA. So I don't want to get into a religious argument. Bhagwat ji also avoided that. But, you've raised some very, very interesting points about, now, may I say that in Kerala, for example, the state government, which is a Marxist government, strongly opposed that particular agitation. They were very, very strongly in opposition to it. Of course, a very large political party in Kerala, which, again, as I said, a party that was supposed to be the grand old party of India, their cadre suddenly got very active in that agitation. You go back to 2011, Vibhuti, and like I said, the good news is because of the internet, you can be proved to be either a liar or a truth teller. Ankit has very brilliantly used the internet to show his prescience. And I really would like to say I admire that prescience. In 2011, I wrote a piece in Sunday Guardian about certain NGOs trying to block the Kudankulam nuclear project. It had been stalled for years and years. Just as, for example, mining of uranium has been stalled in India for years. Somebody comes, they file a case, they have a protest, they have this, they have that, and hey presto, the project is stalled. And I said that certain externally funded NGOs, the NGOs were funded by a country in Europe that was very upset that Russian reactors were being bought and who wanted to sell reactors to India. I'm not going to name countries because, I am a friend of all these countries. I don't want to name them, but I'm sure the people in that country are well aware of which country I'm talking about. They funded this agitation. And the people who were agitating in Kudankulam had no idea.
If I may just ask, don't name the country, but what language do they speak?
Vibhuti, I can assure you they don't speak Hindi, Gujarati or Malayalam. That much I can. But baat to ye hai ki this is the point, So they may not even know. Somebody would have funded this agitation. And that is where my worry is, that you have a very strong Sino-Wahhabi lobby in India. At the same time, let's be honest also, you have a strong conversion lobby in India. And the conversion lobby encompasses two faiths, not just one. But I would not like to blame the people of that faith or blame those faiths. Everybody wants conversion. it has been my view for the last 30 years that we are likely to see some conversions in India. But if Sanatan Dharma is understood in Europe, in the United States, in North America, I can assure you, you will find tens of millions of people becoming Sanatanis. Why? Because Sanatan Dharma is a universal faith. It's a faith, it fits everybody, number one. And number two, it's a faith without boundaries. And the world of the internet is a boundaryless world. That's why my research team can do a lot of investigations, including into countries that have got all kinds of firewalls, because there is no boundary where technology is concerned. And Indian minds are brilliant. It's not just Indian minds in the US. And may I say, Vibhuti, that in your country, it's Indian brains that are essentially responsible for at least 60% of the breakthroughs that you have had in science and technology, especially matters relating to the internet. So I want to say that this situation is there. And what is my worry? My worry is that the Sino-Wahhabi lobby has been working very hard to widen the fault lines in the United States and India, so that you have very clear strength to the fringes. It can be on the ground of Hindu versus Muslim, Hindu versus Christian. Incidentally, India is the one country where, frankly, normally Christians and Muslims fight each other. In India, somehow, because of the mistakes made by the previous government, Christians and Muslims are combined together against in what they call Hindu causes. Let me say one thing about Prime Minister Modi. Prime Minister Modi is a secular person. I say this fully because what that means is equality of all religions. Till Prime Minister Modi, it was difficult to say proudly, garv se kaho, aap Hindu hai. You can say garv se kaho, Muslim hai, garv se kaho, Christian hai, but garv se kaho, Hindu hai, nahi, kabhi nahi ho sakta. In other words, we have, if I may say so, a kind of collective guilt was imposed upon us after the dastardly murder of the Mahatma. It is not Hinduism that is responsible for that. It was politics and one particular gentleman's understanding of geopolitics that caused him to do this very horrible act, if I may say so. But after that, the Hindus have been on the back foot. Why is it that temples are still under state control? That's a colonial era act. The Muslims destroyed a lot of temples. The British took away the temple lands and made the temples poor. But even that did not stop the temples from becoming places where people congregated. So they took over the temples. And in my opinion, I would like to see whether it's a church, a gurdwara, a masjid, or a temple, they should be free of government control. Number one. Number two, under the Right to Education Act, if I may say so, if a Hindu starts a school or a university, 25% of the seats have got to be reserved for people whom the government chooses. If a quote-unquote minority starts it, no such reservation. This is not secularism. I have been saying this for the last 30 years and more. Nehruvian secularism is not secularism. It's a perversion of secularism. Secularism is equal treatment under the law. And this division between majority and minority. Now, 377. I listened today, accidentally, Arundhati Roy, being very unhappy about CAA being a destroyer of peace in India. CAA and 370, unconstitutional. I don't know if Arundhati Roy realizes 370 represented the two-nation theory, that Hindus and Muslims are two separate nations. And from what she was saying, frankly, she feels it is absolutely right to consider Hindus and Muslims as two nations. And therefore, the creation of Pakistan on the ground of religion, whereas religion should never be that kind of a geopolitical factor. So CAA, it has been very, if I may say so, not drafted with the expertly. I would have called it Minority Protection Amendment. I would not have called it Citizenship Amendment Act, because you put it in Urdu, in Bengali, in Konkani, maybe in, I don't know about Tamil. I mean, it can be subject to misinterpretation. The fact is, no Indian citizen is suffering the slightest from CAA, but everybody has got this terrible fear all over the world that this is a discriminatory act against Indian Muslims, that they are going to be deprived of citizenship. Now, this kind of a wrong narrative is everywhere, and I will track this to what I've been writing for some 5 to 6 years about the Sino-Wahhabi lobby multiplying fault lines and basically weakening the middle. I believe, Vibhuti, that the moderate middle is the foundation of society. Like the middle class, the moderate middle. I don't believe in any extremes of religion, extremes of language. For example, एक language को हटाओ, दूसरा language को बनाओ. No, let the people decide what language they want to speak. Tell me, I mean, am I less Indian or Ankit less Indian or less friendly to India because we speak English? Of course not. English is an instrument for progress. It's not the foundation of civilization or culture. And like it or not, about 80% of recorded knowledge today is in the English language as opposed to 20% in all the other languages put together. If the Japanese and others, they have to go back to English to understand a lot of things. Because unfortunately or not, I mean, I would like to see Hindi as the international link language. I would like. Maybe 100 years later, it will become the international link language. And I want to congratulate the Hindi-speaking people. They have never tried to dominate this country in the way Sinhala have tried to dominate in Sri Lanka against the Tamils, or other examples in which the language spoken by the majority is sought to be pushed down the throat of the minority. Shastri said, no, let English continue. When one single state, Tamil Nadu, opposed it. And English today is there all over. So I want to say, Vibhuti, we are getting into some, wrong, if I may say so, we are being led on wrong paths of fighting each other. And when we need to be united, and we need to understand the depths of this conspiracy, the Sino-Wahhabi lobby, because India is against Wahhabism, India is against authoritarian control of the Indo-Pacific. And we are in the sights, in the target sites of this particular lobby. So we have to be very careful that we don't become useful idiots and fall a victim to this. Prime Minister Modi, I see some websites saying the most nasty things about him, that he's not Hindu, he's not supporting Hindus, he's not doing this. Prime Minister Modi has made sure that you can stand up and say, गर्व से कह सकता कि हम Hindu hai. It is Prime Minister Modi who has made that difference, I can tell you. And, what are you saying when you say that he is not supporting Hindu? If they mean that he must support a view of Hinduism, that if you take it to an extreme, it will create multiple fissures in India. So please understand one thing, Vibhuti. Many of our so-called, so-called tribunes and all that, they are unwittingly playing the game of useful idiots of the Sino-Wahhabi lobby and the conversion lobby. But I can only say, if we keep the focus on Sanatan Dharma, which a very inclusive kind of belief, and we, as Bhagavad Ji says, we all have a common DNA, I can assure you, Sanatan Dharma will be the religion of the world a generation from now.
That's wonderful to hear, wonderful to know. Ankit, now that remaining time that we have, I wanted to talk about the 2023 stepping into. There are certain myths that need to go. We live with myths. We live with make-believe world, like, for example, opportunity. There are certain myths that must go. Do you think, as Madhav said just now about Sanatan will dominate the world, do you think rise of spirituality is replacing the fanaticism of religion? Or is the fanaticism of religion becoming in place because of they see the threat from spirituality?
So we have to understand the origins of dharma and the origins of religion and how they are, diagonally different from each other. When a theory comes which talks about strict commandments to be followed to become a believer, you have to understand that it must have originated in a space which had lack of resources, right? And when you see about the origin of dharma, which comes with a thought process of upadesh and not adesh, there's a difference between commandments and seeking, right? So when you see this difference, you can clearly make out that dharmas must have come out at a place of origin where there was abundance of resources. So it's not as white and black to label something as something. And we are not supposed to blame them for having born or created that particular theory in that particular area where there were lack of resources, but we need to understand how the formulation works, what makes them tick, what makes them move towards a world which is purely seeing itself from consumption point of view. It is when you talk about the clash between the east and the west, it is basically, I mean, spiritually speaking, it comes down to a clash between body and soul, right? The dharmas are talking that you are the soul, you are not the body. And the west is saying, no, you are the body, the soul is just a vehicle. So that's where the fundamental clash which is coming between the east and the west. So if you think that you are the body, then this is the only life you have, and then you need to consume everything in this very life. And that is the kind of anxiety and stress that you are going to live in. And the entire crowd which believes those commandments are going to follow the same stress atmosphere all around, because this is the only life now. I got to win, right? So that's the theory which comes in. Whereas when you come to dharmas, it is talking about liberation. It is not talking about consumption. It is talking about liberation. Now, each individual is allowed to questioning and seeking. And that is how each person is going to take his path towards liberation from this life cycles. So that is where the Digambar thought process of dharmas come into place. Whereas the West follows the Abrahamic faiths, follow the Paigambar theory, which is, some messenger of God has come who's going to lay out the commandments and we are supposed to follow those. Otherwise, we won't win. We won't get the resources that we need, which is why we see the entire world, clashing around, in the lust of, finite resources. I should say the word finite here because, crude oil is going to be finite. If it is gold and silver, that is going to be finite. Only the life cycles are going to be infinite, which is where, Madhav sir talking about Sanatan Dharma. That's the beauty of Sanatan Dharma, which talks about this family unit structure where you believe that there are going to be life cycles. You're going to come back to the same planet. You are responsible for each and every natural resources that are there on the planet. You should be preserving water. You should be preserving food. You should be preserving animal life, right? Which is where I believe that there's a whole scope of opportunity for India to pose that we have this whole platter of 4 dharmas which the world can follow, and actually that's what is sustainable. And I believe that when the economic shit hits the fan, that is the point in time then the West will also start searching, oh my god, if this is not working, then what actually works? And I think that will be the point in time they will automatically come to seek the Sanatan values, right? Somebody who's going to chant a mantra before taking food is certainly not going to waste food, because there's an inherent sacred element which automatically got added to that food. Somebody who's going to drink water, after chanting a mantra, he's not going to throw that water off from the glass. So a whole lot of indirect preservation thing automatically happens with Sanatan Dharma. The word dharma itself is talking about the natural characteristic of everything that is in the universe. So you can talk about dharma of water. You can talk about the dharma of fire. You can talk about dharma of a human being. Can you talk about religion of water? You can't. because Sanatana Dharma is talking about the natural characteristic of everything that you need to preserve, which is where this clash should end actually in this world. And I think
Thank you
that's
so much.
where
I wanted to add here to your thing that, like dharma, water, whatever God has given, whatever nature has, whether it's a tree, the elephant, the sun, the moon, the stars, they have no religion. They exist. And that's the message that we need to advance. Last question of the day and the last inquiry of the day would be that, I wanted to touch upon the climate change, whether it's real or fiction. I will leave it at that. It's a subject matter for another conversation. But is technology, and this is a question to both of you, make it a very short answer. Do you think technology will force greater accountability on everyone? Politics, society, because you can't hide anymore. Because the tail is always there. Do you think technology will bring about certain amount of honesty and integrity and accountability in life? Because that's what I told in one of the consulting work that I was doing. And somebody asked me, how will technology affect? And I said, you can't hide anymore. So what do you say about that, Professor?
Look, I'd like to take over from what Ankit was saying and point out that in our ancient belief systems, there is a question of rebirth. When you are rebirth, then you have to be careful about looking after the earth, because you're going to be reborn in this earth. Correct. You may be reborn in a much humbler manner than you are born now. So what you're doing on this earth, you are going to confront that. But if you have a belief that there's no question of rebirth, and I know, for example, I've gone to different parts of, Pakistan, the borders of Pakistan, Afghanistan, etc. And I've seen people basically lecture young people that, look, your life begins at the grave. Your life doesn't, this is not life. This is just nothing. The real life begins at the grave. And it begins at the grave. If you do certain things, then eternally you're going to be in a different kind of life. Now, they believe whatever they do on earth, it doesn't matter, because they're not going to come back to earth. They're going to be in heaven or hell. Now, if you have that belief, you instinctively don't feel a kind of a feeling that you must do something about it. Let's say a house that you live in and a hotel room. I think the respect that you have for your own house is more than for the hotel room, because the house is there. It's going to be there today. Tomorrow, you're going to come back to it. A hotel room you never see again. So that is the difference that Sanatana Dharma has and the concept of rebirth has, frankly, Vibhuti. And that is where, in my opinion, in the United States, in Europe, in China, for heaven's sake, they're very much in Taiwan, I see so many people who have become vegetarian. So many people. As far as learning yoga is concerned, I'm ashamed to say I don't know yoga, hardly anything. I do a little bit. I've done a little bit, but I've really not done it, practiced it. But it's all over. So in a sense, you are getting a Sanatani lifestyle. You are slowly developing that through, taking a diet that is good for the planet, through doing things that are good for the health, and very importantly, if you know you're going to come back, you look after that space much more than if you think you'll never come back.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. The time is up. Yep. 1 hour is never sufficient to talk about varieties of issues. And I wanted to talk about some of your favorite subject matter, Ankit. So I would hope Madhav and Ankit, both of you will come again, because there are issues to be talked about. As we step into 2023, I wish and pray for all of you. And I say that 2023, let it be better than 2022 was. Let's not be any glorious in our saying. I always say that. Let your 2023 be better than 2022 in every sense of the term. And there are people always think about resolutions. I believe not in resolutions, I believe in resolve. So I have a simple practice, and I want to share that with you and the audience as well, is that in 2023, think about one thing that you have always been wanting to do and you haven't done. do it. Think about something that you want to stop doing and you have not done. Stop doing that. That's the way I operate on my resolves. So, having said that, Happy New Year to everybody. A very glorious time in 2023. I hope Satyamev Jayate is true. I hope Sanatan captures the world's imagination. That is the truth. And that's what is important for all of us. So, with these words, I would say like, subscribe our Jaipur Dialogue USA and Jaipur Dialogue channels, and support us. We need your support to carry the message of truth, of Dharma. Thank you very much, gentlemen, and see you again sometime.